All right, this is the talk that I wish I'd received earlier in my career, demystifying leadership in the tech career journey. I started my career in tech about 17 years ago, right out of school, and over the course of I often ask myself questions that I didn't have answers for, such as, is this new role right for me? How do I prepare to get to the next level? Is it time to move on? And sometimes the questions were, why am I feeling unfulfilled? And frankly, why am I exhausted? I didn't have any mental frameworks or tools or even people all the time to guide me. It wasn't like there was a handbook for how to navigate your career in tech or grow as a leader. So this talk is a step in helping you all in your career journeys. So I worked at a couple companies. Most of that time was at Google. I've gotten promoted several times. It wasn't particularly fast or well-planned or deliberate. I moved around a bunch, changed teams and projects many times, and I got to learn many new areas. And I also had the opportunity to get exposure to a lot of different people, team cultures, organization structures, as well as close collaboration with several external companies. So it took me some time to figure out how to grow into the next level, and I eventually worked it out along the way. And I've also built expertise in guiding others in their growth and career advancement, such as mentoring and growing the careers of my reports as a manager, and always organically mentored people, like new hires, and now increasingly senior people to staff engineers. And most recently, I trained to be a coach for leaders in tech. So I'm passionate about this topic. I have a sense of the career challenges that people around me are grappling with. I know that there aren't great resources readily available, and I've witnessed too many leaders struggle because they didn't get the right support. And so these are the reasons I'm excited to give this talk. So in this talk, I want to guide you through this rubric of scope, skills and interests, personal preferences, and resilience, and hopefully show how you can use these to navigate your career, especially as you become increasingly senior. Leadership is not a pillar in this talk, it's an underlying theme throughout the talk. So fundamental to the tech career journey is the concept of scope. As you progress in your career, there is increasing scope and complexity in the system you are responsible for. So let's take these one at a time and dig in. What is complexity? What are these systems? What is your responsibility? I'll note that my coverage of scope in the next few slides is heavily skewed to the engineering ladder, but the concept of scope applies to any job function. UX, design, analyst, DevRel, it even extends beyond the tech industry. So complexity of a system can be defined by these 4 factors. What are the components of the system? How complex are they? What are the dependencies and interactions with other systems and their complexity? Who are the stakeholders of the system? How varying are the needs of different stakeholders? And finally, what are the failure modes of the system and the integrations it has with other systems? So your role is essentially managing this system by applying your judgment. And I've broken it down into these steps, starting with, like developing expertise in the system, understanding its dependencies, as well as set of integrations with other systems, understanding who the stakeholders are, managing their expectations, and in engineering specifically, building solutions and robust integrations. So I'll share a story From a while ago, when I was a junior engineer, I wanted to become a senior engineer. I was working on the Google search front end. We had a project for making our server multi-threaded. And I apologize if the example is a bit esoteric, but please bear with me. So we had to make every single subsystem in this server multi-threaded. And I got this meaty job of a templating engine that was rendering search results. So I'm not yet senior, but I'm still pretty much following this list, starting with building expertise in the system, understanding the dependencies and the interfaces, understanding stakeholder expectations, proposing a solution to restructure it while preserving functionality, and anticipating failure modes. And at this point, I felt like, hey, I have single-handedly taken on this rather meaty problem in a complex area. I'd worked really hard, and I wanted to go for promotion. So my tech lead appreciated my work. Like, that was great, but also let me know that I needed to do more to become a senior engineer. So the key takeaway here is that your work can be great. It may be exemplary, but that doesn't mean that it has the scope needed for the next level. And I often see people confused about this. Hey, I'm doing a great job. Why am I not moving up to the next level? Sometimes it's a matter of time, but sometimes it's inadequate scope and complexity. So continuing on my example, like I took on a more open-ended problem in the same project, right? Like multi-threading had made our server harder to maintain. It was easier to write thread unsafe code, which would cause crashes in production. So my assignment was to make the system resilient. I developed a comprehensive testing debugging plan. And again, I'm pretty much following this list, like developing expertise in the system, digging in to understand vulnerabilities across the entire surface of our server, understanding development and release processes, managing the stakeholders. We have search feature developers contributing features, and our team leads responsible for the server, so managing their competing goals, anticipating failure modes. I created several solutions, and hopefully at this point, you can start to see that the scope and complexity involves moving parts spanning the entire server. And the work I did was well beyond contributing code. I went from rewriting a single subsystem, working with one maintainer, to leading an important effort across an entire server, guiding other engineers. And as a result, project goals were met. I got promoted to a senior engineer, which was L5 at Google, so success. And now I could see why the scope of my first project alone wasn't enough. So what happens when you move beyond senior to like staff and higher levels? It's still the same complexity framework. Like you're still talking about complexity in terms of depths, stakeholders, failure modes, but there's an order of magnitude step up in the complexity of each of these pieces. The system starts to involve many humans and groups of people, and it turns out learning to work with people becomes really helpful at this stage. And so to contextualize the difference between senior and staff, I want to again draw from my example. Like when I became a staff engineer at Google, I was entrusted with web infrastructure needed by 100+ Google web apps, different teams across the company. The system involved multiple complex parts. There were many servers, a large client code base, many pipelines for optimizing serving, JavaScript, CSS, a complex data system, many test harnesses, features spanning a spectrum from translations to security. So hopefully it's becoming clear that it's impossible for me or any one person to become the sole expert in all of these areas. So I had to work with a team of many senior and junior engineers. At this point, I'm giving direction to 10, 15 engineers, influencing many peer teams. And I still needed enough expertise to jump in as needed or delegate effectively. The dependencies are multiple complex systems outside of my organization, and we have many stakeholders across the company, the primary being our customer base, hundreds of developers of web apps, and I'm responsible for their success, such as important launches. And our stakeholders span the company, like industry compliance bodies, central security, privacy teams. So hopefully it's starting to become clear how this is different from my last level promotion, right? And today, as a senior staff software engineer, I would say I have yet another order of magnitude of scope and complexity. I'm not going to go into it today. So switching, I want to talk about systems thinking. At higher levels, this systems thinking mindset really helps in problem solving. And someday I'd like to give a talk just on this topic, but for now, I want to share these 3 steps. Like when you're grappling with a problem, consider stepping back and examining the interactions between interconnected systems and dependencies. Look at what forces are at play. This is a bit different from the traditional tech problem solving of breaking the system into parts and digging into it separately. So let's say your team is struggling to collaborate with another team, right? Your team is contributing code in an area that the other team owns, and your team is telling you that, hey, the other team is being difficult, they're not merging our patches. So what can you do? The problem is never as simple as presented by one party, right? And so this is where systems thinking can help. What are the parts of the system? There are at least 2 different teams, there's a code base. I would also consider environmental factors. Is either team under some time pressure or other constraints? Does the other team have different values? Are there historical patterns at play here? The code base is a part of the system. Does it have norms and processes that are not being respected? Your team is part of the system, so most likely their actions and interactions with the other team are playing into this situation. And you are part of the system too, because you are setting course and influencing the actions of your team. But this also means that you can steer the system in a better direction. So considering these factors, like the step 2 here is reflect and seek different perspectives, especially outside of yourself, and in this case, outside of your team. Just like you don't solve a big technical problem without talking to anybody, like you might request a design review or a code review from peers. So similarly here, get different perspectives, find parties representing different parts of the system, and get their input. And then the last step here is identifying behavior changes to try. A behavior change will impact the dynamics of the system, and you'll have to wait and see if it moves it in the right direction. Like you might create a new process for these teams, or you might give some guidance to one of the teams, and the first thing you try might not work. So you might line up a second option to try at a later point. So these steps, I believe, will practically help in any problem that you encounter at higher levels. It could be, one of your reports is struggling to step up. It could be a team that you're responsible for is not delivering. And it could be that a key customer is unhappy. And so I encourage you to kind of use the systems thinking model to tackle these types of problems. So to summarize this section on scope, like your scope grows as you manage systems of increasing complexity over time. And the complexity changes dramatically beyond senior levels. You go from solving technical problems to understanding and identifying problems to ultimately figuring out how to think about the problem area while leading teams. And system thinking can really help here beyond the senior level. And if you're interested in this topic, I also recommend this talk by Jonathan. It goes into way more detail of all the different kind of job levels and roles and responsibilities. So in a nutshell, your scope is the system you are entrusted with. It's a function of the complexity of the system and your responsibilities. And you use your judgment in managing the system. Your scope should not be too comfortable. It should always be stretching you. And that is what fuels growth. One last thing on scope, which we don't tend to think about as much: who is giving you the scope? This could be your manager, your tech lead, or a supervisor. Like we all make decisions, big decisions, like taking a new job or a new role, often based on the people who are offering us this role. What should you look for in this person? They seem cool. Well, that's a good sign, but I'd also suggest asking a couple more questions, such as, do I think they believe in me? Can they support my growth? This is really important, especially when you're interested in advancing in your career. Your supervisor not only has to see your current abilities and skills, but they also have to see your future potential and support your growth to the next level. And then I would also go further and ask, hey, do I believe in them? And lastly, are they growing in scope or influence? And that roughly is equivalent to saying, hey, does their leadership believe in them? And because if they are growing and going places, that's a great sign for your advancement as well. Okay, so switching gears, we'll talk about function areas and skills. Like as you take on a new scope or a new role, especially at higher levels, you get a bunch of different responsibilities. This includes core technical skills, people management, growing careers. In the fourth and third quadrant, we have project management, like steering execution, coordinating across teams. And finally, we have product, like defining the product, understanding market forces, shaping strategy. So this is literally how my current project is structured. We have like these trios of PM, program manager doing project management, and a tech lead. And they're working with teams and team managers across the org. And in my last role, I had to wear many of these hats. So I've kind of seen both sides of this. Like you either fill the roles yourself, or you work with people who lead these other functions. And as a leader in tech, you learn to operate across these functions, growing your skills or finding people to collaborate with. And learning to collaborate well across your cross-functional partners is important. You're essentially assessing and assembling your squad. And this is also a reason why people leave. They are lonely or they're overburdened, they can't find collaborators, or they haven't yet gained the needed skills in that role. Or they are unhappy, they're not getting along with one of these functions. It's important to note that companies have this shape also, based on which functions the leaders of that company or organization or that team value. They'll be stronger in those areas. Like you might have some experience with an organization that really values getting their tech right, or an organization that really takes care of their people. And I've rarely seen a team or an organization that's equally strong on all fronts. And so this is why it's really important to clarify to yourself what is most important to you, both for the shape of the team or organization you are joining, as well as for yourself. Like figure out what you personally like, don't like, and try things based on these interests. Sometimes there may be an opportunity to shift between functions, such as switching between a manager and an individual contributor. So up next is your personal preferences. These are a function of your values and life priorities. Values are what give you a sense of meaning or purpose. And this could be things like bringing a new product to the market to help a user segment, or perhaps you're passionate about advancing the web platform, or maybe you value close relationships with coworkers. Life priorities are about what else is going on in your life. Maybe you're preparing to run a triathlon or having a first child. So consider the larger picture of your whole life when making career decisions. And how you like to be recognized is also a personal preference. Recognition is potentially meaningful to you from your immediate peer community, or perhaps from the top leaders in your industry. Maybe you value a promotion for title or money, or recognition from your employer. And finally, we have resilience. Resilience is all about staying in the game, and this is critical to the career journey. I'm going to borrow from Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. It is called Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. And this is resilience. People who have grit, who are able to sustain their determination and motivation over long periods, despite setbacks and adversity. So passion is that inner fire that gets you out of bed, that you bring with you every day. And perseverance is about keeping at it, bouncing back from setbacks, coming back the next day. There are two challenges to resilience. The first is fear. And it's like having anxiety about a topic. Let's say you're worried about a key customer pulling out or a major partnership not working out. So you have to manage your anxiety. And it's about keeping your nervous system from getting in the way. The second challenge to resilience is fatigue. This is about managing your internal resources for recovery, like sleep, rest, and also utilizing external resources to recharge, such as a supportive community at work or outside of work. And ultimately, resilience is how you cope with burnout. For those who are motivated, I would also suggest creating a one-year vision and writing down some goals. Like knowing your preferences helps you shape your vision. And having a vision and some goals written down can really help with building resilience. So that's it. We covered scope, which grows as you manage systems of increasing complexity. We talked about skills and interests. This is about identifying which of those 4 functions suit you and what is fun and valuable. And also considering the shape of the organization as well. What do they value, and also what do they reward? We also covered preferences. This is values, meaning, life priorities, and recognition. And finally, we talked about resilience, passion, and perseverance for long-term goals. And so to really support your tech career journey, understand these 4 things, being honest with yourself about where you are and where you want to go. All right, so this rubric can be used to help answer questions like this one. How can I prepare for that next level, right? So what would you look for scope? Does it have the next level scope? And how can I be seen a leader doing this work? For skills and interests, similarly, like using the 4 functions, which skills would I need to grow? And which new behaviors would I need to model? And similarly for preferences, like, what will I give up to stretch here? How does it affect the other priorities in my life? Is this the recognition I want? And do I want it now? And finally, for resilience, will I persevere in this pursuit? What is going to cause me anxiety? And lastly, when you are stretching and growing to the next level, it can be really helpful to get support. And so, these are 3 different types of supporters you could have in your life. Mentors give you advice. They have relevant knowledge and skills and experience, and they share that with you because you have a relationship. A sponsor is usually someone higher up in the org chart who advocates for you. They will see your potential, they make a bet, and they bat for you in places where you're not even present. And finally, you have a coach. Coach is like someone who has coaching skills and making that available as a resource. And coaching just helps you articulate your problems to yourself. The coach can help you brainstorm ideas, make choices, and support execution. So I have a few more questions seated here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can start to see how this rubric can help you answer questions like this. Is it time to move on to another opportunity? Why am I unhappy or feeling unfulfilled? Am I exhausted? Am I burning out? That's it for today. Thank you. We can go to questions.
Let's just try to figure out a few questions here that came in the chat. There's actually a lot. We could just do this like literally again forever as well. It's kind of funny. One thing that actually came quite a bit is, so do job roles matter? In our organization, company, everybody is doing a bit of everything, and so roles are not as important as in some other companies. Would you say that roles are, for example, one thing that has become very important for me is when people ask me, it's like, I think personally, like in my experience, you have to be very, very careful when you actually getting hired, when you're in a job interview, just to be very, very clear about what kind of position you are being hired for. And personally, I think that job titles matter a lot. Like, I'll probably spend as much time as I only can to focus on just really picking the right one, so I'm not being hired for a position that's different. Would you say that this is pretty much true, or is it a bit different depending on the organization you might be working on or for?
Yeah, like definitely. I think I actually have a whole slide about this.
Okay.
But we'll, talk about it more. Like how to make that decision of, is this the right role for me? And what are all the considerations there? I would say even the things that we have covered so far, like considering what scope are they offering you, like important question, right? And then beyond that, like again, like the job function-wise, what is your shape? Are you going to be more of a people manager or an individual contributor? Or are you like responsible for driving execution in that role? Like kind of clarifying kind of the functional skills is really important because you probably are not going to enjoy all of them. So even just for your own sanity, like knowing that what your interests are a good match for what this job really is, but also what is the shape of this organization? Do they value like the thing that you value? Like,
Right.
Whether it's execution or getting the tech right, taking care of people, or strategy? And then finally, what are you going to be rewarded for in that organization, right? Like maybe you love product, like you love thinking about like market forces, but the organization values execution.
Right.
So finding that match.
Another thing that also came up here, which is actually quite related maybe, if you don't feel that your company is supporting your career path and advancement, how can you help yourself or know when it's time to move on? Oh, that's a dramatic question there. But like, how do you know?
Yeah, so that is, again, like actually one of the questions that I didn't fully answer, but I kind of seeded in this. Like again, try using the rubric, right? Like scope, am I happy with my scope? If I want to advance, does this role, is it providing me with that next level scope and the next level opportunity? Similarly, like kind of moving on to function skills, like maybe it's the mismatch that's making you ready to move on and you're unhappy. And then kind of on the personal preferences, right? Like I talked about, like think about what's meaningful to you, what are your life priorities, and how you like to be recognized. Like those could all be reasons, like one of them is just not gelling in the current role. Company values X, you value Y, like they value, let's say consumers, and you value technology, and that it's just not matching for you in that situation. It could also be like recognition, like maybe you actually want to be recognized in the broader industry or by certain leaders in your industry. And in this company, the best is like you'll get a promotion within that company. And that's not exactly how you want to be recognized. So these are, again, like using the same rubric, you can start thinking about, is it time to move on?
Yeah, so it's always a bit of a, I don't know, for me personally, it always feels like almost a little bit of a gamble. At some point you will feel like, okay, this is probably the right thing to do. But still, you kind of need time to find, let's say, another job, another opportunity there as well. Yeah, but that's okay, because we have so many questions in here, and that's just incredible. Thank you so much, Shubhie, for all of this, of course, first of all.
No worries, guys.
So many things came up here. It's like I don't even know where to start. One thing is, which is interesting. Should managers absolutely have deep technical or UX skills? Or is it enough to have good leadership skills and know enough about technical things in UX?
That's a great question. Yeah, so you definitely need to know something about the area, right? Like you are going to represent it outside of this team, upwards to your leadership or other parts of the company. So you have to be able to intelligently speak to the tech. And the other thing is you either have to have your own tech leads and deep technical experts that you trust, and then you can kind of go hash it out with them and kind of get create your mental map, or you have to have enough technical expertise. Like if you don't have that tech lead that you trust, like now you have to go talk to many engineers and find the weaknesses. Do I believe this timeline? Is this a reasonable scoped thing for this person to deliver on and so forth? So I think those are your options. Like either get the technical expertise yourself or get the technical leads that you can rely on.
Another question that came up here is, how long would it usually take to become fluent in a new role? To effectively mediate between all these relationships and for your colleagues to respect your new role as your perspective changes?
Yeah, how long does it take to
be feeling kind of comfortable again in this role where you find your seat and you are being fluent in it, you understand the processes, how it all works and so on?
Yeah, so I mean, first off, I will say that you are never 100% comfortable, right? Like that's just not even desirable. You should always be a little uncomfortable. And so the question, yes. So the question is, like how do you feel like, okay, I've got a handle on things, right? Like that's the bar. It's not that, am I comfortable is not the question. So in terms of like getting a handle, it really depends on, again, like the complexity of the system, your own experience, and what the gap is. I would say 90 days is sort of like a baseline. And in some teams, and if it's a new area, like 6 months is not crazy either.
Okay. Here's an interesting one as well. I mean, thank you so much for writing all those questions and also the notes. You are just unbelievable. Like everybody who's watching us live now, and also you are here. It's just incredible to see all of this here happening. Here's an interesting one. Can an individual contributor grow in their career, increasing scope and complexity, without having to manage people? I guess there is a person who doesn't like to manage people, but likes the rest.
Depends on the company. I definitely know there are tech ladders in several companies that support the IC trajectory beyond senior levels. In fact, I suggest Jonathan's talk, if you are interested in like kind of the details of like the next level. But yeah, like find a company that supports that if that's actually what you care about. But also, maybe like after you try out management, you might find that it doesn't take that much of your headspace or bandwidth, in which case you can still potentially be doing the technical work that you're passionate about.
Yeah, I do know a few people who were actually kind of in a senior staff position even, and then trying to move further into the management, that they were not sure if management is a thing for them, because very often, I don't know about you, do we have any managers here in the room, by the way? Yeah, we do, we do. I feel sorry that what I'm going to say next. I think that very often when I talk to people, they think that managers are people who are just all the time in meetings, in plannings, in reports, and writing down things, and I don't want to do this. I mean, not me, they would say. That might just not be for everybody. And also, there might be some sort of a mix of different tasks that you're going to do. And very often what they tell me is, whenever you move to the management position, you don't want to move back, because it would be seen as, oh, okay, it didn't work for me, and you kind of go back, and it would be seen maybe awkwardly for people around you. I think it's not a problem of failing, of course, but would you say, like, how do you know that this is definitely something you need to try? Because it's probably not for everyone.
Yeah, I would say like if you're growing as a technical leader, like it makes sense to try it at some point, and it's totally fine. Like I actually just went back from being a manager to an individual contributor, and it's completely socially acceptable, right? Like that's no problem, at least maybe it could vary with the company culture. In terms of like those job functions, I again feel like it's because we put everything that's not tech in the manager bucket, when there's actually like these 4 quadrants. There's a lot of stuff around execution, coordination between teams that, like program managers, or we have TPMs at Google, technical program managers, can be facilitating, and maybe you should try and get those resources. Like maybe you can get like 50% bandwidth of, a program manager for your project, and same for product, right? Like there's a lot of work in terms of like, like what is the shape of the product, like a lot of research, market research, defining the shape and the strategy and the roadmap. And then we kind of put all of that into the management bucket.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for all of this. So maybe just one more, because this is also an interesting one. And also, if you have any questions for SHUBHIE, which is something I forgot to mention, by the way, you can also find our speakers outside. So if you exit here and go to the right, you have this wonderful view of the Golden Gate Bridge. That's a nice conversation point. And also have a conversation started with all the questions that you might have. So you can find speakers there and ask questions directly as well. But maybe just to wrap up this one, here's again a more interesting one as well, which I noticed too. When I started my career, asking for a promotion seemed very rare. Now, I find younger team members are very driven and expect promotion opportunities very soon after joining. How quickly do you think it's reasonable to expect and seek to advance in a role through promotion?
It probably depends on the company and the ladder. I would say going up to senior, like 1.5 years is not a crazy cadence, at least at Google. Like every year and a half, or more reasonably 2.5 years is, I would say, more realistic. But I have definitely seen like every year and a half people, getting promoted. And then I would say beyond senior, it takes more time, just because the scope and the impact you have to show takes time. Like I would be suspicious if someone moved from like senior to staff in a year. Like how did you have that much impact or manage that much complexity or scope so fast? So I would say beyond senior, it's more like 2.5 to 3.5 years is more reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, with all those insights, what's next for you? Do you have a big plan of what's coming up, like in general? Is there like a particular role or anything that you'd like to take over? What would be the next big thing for you?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy. I just started a new role 4 or 5 months ago, leading privacy and anti-tracking. So I'm like up to here in, like the complexity of this space. The stakeholder landscape is crazy, from like regulators to like press, standards bodies. Like it's a very tight space, but it kind of gives me a flavor of that kind of next level of complexity.
Right. Well, we are very much looking forward to the next level of complexity you're going to reach. Thank you so much for all the wonderful insights. Sorry about this hiccup with my
No
machine.
worries,
It's all
all
my
good.
fault. Yes, and please give a round of applause to SHUBHIE PANICKER, everyone.
Thank you.